going to try to tell me that the stomach actually has a very strong connection to the brain?
Well, the stomach does, but it's actually probably more the small intestine that's doing the main stuff, Rob. The gut-brain connection, it's always been understood by naturopaths and homeopaths and to some extent chiropractors, but it's now becoming very part of mainstream medicine. I've just come back from Sydney yesterday after a 3-day seminar with the MIN Foundation, which is a predominantly medical but multidisciplinary foundation that pushes the most recent information on what's happening with autism. And the big thing they've been pushed in the last 2 years is the idea that an unhealthy gut sets up an unhealthy brain. And I mean, like one of the things that came out of this is a thing called helminth therapy. Now, you know, if you say helminths, most farmers are going, what, those things we drench for? And you go, yeah, that's right, that's them. But, you know, children are meant to live in dirt when they're little. And, you know, and some parents go, oh, God, I can't keep him out of the garden. He's constantly shoveling the stuff in. Don't worry about it. Just make sure there's no cat poo in there, you know, and you'll be fine. Because, in fact, that's the child inoculating themselves because they just feel like eating dirt and they're inoculating themselves with the normal everyday bugs that their gut should have in there. And they're picking up a few parasites. And that is setting up a system where the whole thing balances and regulates properly. There's a type of white cell called an eosinophil, right? Now, it turns up over here with asthma, eczema, hay fever, the atopic disorders. But it also turns up over here fighting parasites. And it's like having a whole army and all the fellas are sitting around going, no parasites, what do we do? Oh, let's go wreck some skin, create some asthma.
So, I mean, we drench against them, against parasites and
Well,
turtles.
yeah, well, you see, then that's again, it's the whole complexity of ecosystems. Like sheep in the wild or goats in the wild, right? They would have large herbivores with them too, and there'd be predators, and there'd be birds, right? And the birds are eating the poo and taking the eggs out, and the parasites out, and the dung beetles are burying it, and you know, there's this whole thing. But we put a monoculture in the form of a sheep, and a monoculture in the form of a paddock full of a certain type of ryegrass or clovers, and maybe a bit of lucerne, right? And then you create a situation where what would be a balanced situation where the parasite loading is brought down by all the other beasties in the area, right? Where they're eating their own eggs and the parasite loading goes up. And people can get that too. But I would say to mothers out there, don't be overly keen on the old drenching them, you know, just change their diet a wee bit. Increase the green leafies, cut out the sugars and the carbohydrates, right? And they'll stop scratching their bum.
So actually sugars are something that people are getting very, very wary of now.
Sugar, they reckon, is as hard to give up as cocaine, right? And I've given up sugar, so I'm not going to start cocaine. It was very hard.
It was very hard, yes.
But they both fire up dopamine receptors in the brain. These are the things that make us feel happy, you know, happy receptors. So, you know, I feel depressed, what do I do? Bar of chocolate, feel good, and now I feel bad about the chocolate, so I'll have some more.
Some more chocolate.
So, yeah, but then, see, the stuff goes into the gut, and the gut's brilliant. I mean, like for instance, there are these bacteria in your gut associated with casein, right? And they do very well on milk, and we don't necessarily do that well on milk, not on lots of it anyway. And these bugs take the casein and convert them to casein opioids. And those opioids fire up opioid receptors in the brain, exactly the same way heroin does, or morphine does, right? And so, you know, the person goes, but I need cheese, and you go, of course you do. Shoot it up into your arm, you know.
You're not going to get me to give up cheese though, John.
That's what they say, Rob. And it's the same, you get gluten opioids as well. So the same thing is, so if you eat a whole lot of one food, you'll build a whole lot of that bug, and that bug will then actually regulate the environment so that you keep it fed. Clever stuff.
So what do we do? I mean, you've just come back from a seminar. What's the take-home message?
Remember that we talked about you live on the planet, beneath the skies, in the presence of mortals and before the divinities. Heidegger's idea of how you set up the good life, right? Well, let's just go back to beneath the skies, right? You go with the seasons. So eat what's in season. Vary your diet with the seasons, right? Eat a large range of foods, right? Don't go for anything in a cardboard packet. Right? That's not a good idea, or a plastic bag.
Because it's full of preservatives.
Well, it's full of preservatives. It's got high levels usually of carbohydrates and sugars, and these tend to feed the bad bugs. some carbohydrate in your diet's great. You need a bit, right? But it's about balance. Balance is everything. It's about creating this ecosystem in there that's, what do you reckon the numbers are? How many bugs do you reckon you got in your gut?
Oh, there'll be lots and lots and lots.
About 100 trillion.
100 trillion.
100 trillion. There's a massive number, right? And so these are what, and the genetic diversity in your gut is about 30,000 times the genome of a person. So that's how much, and all that stuff's producing stuff, and we're utilising it. So a really good diverse gut flora, right, is producing all sorts of things that end up in your blood that your body uses. And if you eat grass, right, then you're going to end up with a monoculture and, you know, that sort of thing. Like, you know, I know from the West Coast, we used to stick some of these cattle we had and you'd chuck them out in the back blocks into a bit of Parkey swamp, right? And you'd leave them and they'd come back as fully grown beasties and as healthy as hell. Mad, but healthy.
John, thank you very much indeed.